They say the river never forgets. It remembers the laughter of children who splash in its shallows, the sorrow of mothers who weep on its banks, and the whispers of the elders who seek its wisdom. But on that fateful morning in Eket, the river carried a secret to our village, a child wrapped in the embrace of an ancient tree's roots. I was just a boy when we found him, no older than 10. The entire village had gathered by the river's edge, murmuring among themselves. The women clutched their wrappers tightly, their eyes darting between the still figure and the water. The men, armed with nothing but their wary glances, hesitated. It was Ensa, the village herbalist, who stepped forward first. He knelt beside the child, his fingers tracing the wet fabric that clung to the small frame. The boy was no older than a few weeks, yet his skin was warm, his breath steady. A child left in the river should not have survived, and yet there he was, eyes shut as if merely dreaming. "He is not an ordinary child," Ensa murmured. "The river does not return what it takes unless it has purpose." That was the day Ekong became one of us. Ekong grew like any other child in Eket, but it was clear from the beginning that he was different. Animals followed him wherever he went. Birds perched on his shoulders, stray dogs rested at his feet, and even the most skittish goats allowed him to touch them. The wind seemed to dance around him, rustling leaves and lifting dust in playful spirals. And sometimes, just sometimes, we swore we heard whispers in the air when he passed. At first, the village welcomed these strange occurrences. The elders declared him a child blessed by the river goddess. But as the years passed, the whispers grew darker. The first sign came when old Mama Udo fell ill. She had always been a fearful woman, clutching her charms and muttering prayers under her breath whenever Ekong passed. One night, she claimed to see shadows moving in his hut, twisting and stretching like spirits unchained. The next morning, she was gone, her frail body curled up as if frozen in fear. The villagers began to murmur, their once loving gazes turning to wary glances. When the harvest failed the following season, the whispers grew louder. "He is a child of the river, but does the river give without taking?" I stood by his side as the village turned colder toward him. He did not complain, nor did he retreat. He only smiled, though his eyes held questions none of us could answer. Then came his 18th birthday. The night before, Ekong sat by the riverbank, his feet sinking into the cool mud. I sat beside him, knowing this day weighed heavier on him than the others. He had spent his whole life wondering, searching for the truth of who he was. "I will ask the river tomorrow," he said at last. His voice was steady, but I knew his heart was not. I must know. Dawn came with a hush over the village, as if the world itself held its breath. Ekong stood by the river's edge, his back straight, his voice firm as he spoke. "Tell me who I am." The water trembled. The river, which had always been gentle, began to churn. A wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the gasps of the villagers who had gathered in fearful curiosity. And then it rose. A figure shimmered within the waves, its form identical to Ekong's. It stepped forward, not onto the land, but onto the surface of the water, walking as though the river was solid ground. "You are of two worlds," the figure spoke, its voice a blend of many, deep as the elders, soft as the wind, heavy as the storm. "One of man, one of water, but you must choose." The villagers gasped. Enesa stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "What does he mean, child?" Ekong's hands clenched into fists. "Why must I choose?" The figure's face was his own, but its expression was something else entirely, sorrowful, knowing. "Because the river does not give without taking." A silence heavier than any before settled upon us. The meaning was clear. If Ekong was meant to stay among us, something would be taken in return. If he returned to the river, he would never walk our land again. The village held its breath, and we, who had once been his family, waited for his answer. Ekong looked around, his gaze falling on the people who had raised him, the land that had been his home. He had known laughter here, and sorrow. He had been loved, then feared. He saw the worry in my eyes, the silent plea to stay. But beyond that, there was doubt. A doubt that had lived within him since the moment he had understood he was different. "If I stay," he said slowly, "what will the river take?" The figure in the water did not answer. Instead, the river grew darker, its surface rippling with an unseen force. Then, from the depths, a hand emerged, thin, pale, familiar. It was Mama Udo, her face twisted in pain, eyes hollow, lips moving without sound. The villagers cried out in terror. "What is this?" Ensa demanded, stepping back. The figure of Ekong in the water looked at him, sorrow deep in its glowing eyes. "The river never forgets. It has been patient, but now it comes to collect." Ekong's face hardened. He turned to me, his oldest friend, the one who had stood by him when no one else would. "Tell me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "If you were me, what would you do?" The river swelled, rising higher. The villagers backed away, fear thick in the air. The choice had to be made. Ekong took a deep breath. The sky darkened, and the wind howled through the village, sending dust and leaves swirling into the air. He stepped forward, reaching a hand toward the water. The river figure mirrored his movement, their fingers inches apart. A moment stretched into eternity. Then Ekong turned away. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I choose this life." The river roared. The villagers gasped. And then the figure dissolved, the water rushing back into itself as if nothing had ever happened. The sky cleared, the wind calmed. The village exhaled in relief. But I saw it, the sadness in Ekong's eyes. He had won, but at what cost? For weeks after, he would sit by the river staring at its surface. Sometimes he would place his hand over the water, waiting for something, perhaps another answer, perhaps a sign. None came, but the river never forgets, and one day it may return for him. And when it does, will he resist again, or will the river finally take what it has been waiting for?